So let's talk about actually taking photos with our film camera. So I want to make sure I match my ISO. I'm pushing this film, which we'll talk about in a future project, to 800, but I'll set it to 400. That's what my film is. There we go. It's on there nice and firm. So some of you have an ASA or ISO. It's the same thing. It's just different words to describe it. So this camera has a program or a P setting, which means if I use it with a program lens or an auto lens, it will handle everything for me. It'll handle all the metering for me. I don't have to set anything. I literally set my lens to this A and we're good to go. But most cameras are not program cameras. By the way, that would only work if I had a battery in here, which I do have a battery, but if you don't, then that's obviously not gonna work. So let's change it out of program mode. So this dial with these numbers, if you look at these, and you'll probably realize, oh, this is the shutter speed, right? So this is 1/60th of a second, 1/125th of a second, 1/250th of a second, and so on, versus 1/15th of a second, and slower and slower and slower until we're on bulb mode, which means it'll just be open as long as we hold this. Okay, so I'm gonna have it at 1/60th. That's a good starting place. And then my lens, which is set to A right now, I'll go ahead and get it out of that mode. Give me just a second. Okay, the lens is where you set the aperture. So this is 1.4, 2, 2.8, 4, 5.6, etc. So if I'm on 1.4, then I will try to shoot and we'll see what it looks like. You know, I'm not gonna get that instant satisfaction. So how do I actually know that I'm shooting properly? Well, this camera actually has a meter in it. So whenever you press this down slightly, let me just do that really quickly. See, there's lights on the side, and those little lights are actually telling me it's too bright or it's too dark, and I need to change my settings. If your camera doesn't have a meter, you can still shoot. You're gonna shoot using what's called the Sunny 16 rule. So here's the general rule of thumb. You set your ISO to be matching to your film, so 400 ISO, 400 film. Then you set your shutter speed to be close to your ISO, but like as close to your ISO as you can get without going over. So my ISO is 400, so 500 would be going over my ISO, but 250 would be under it. So I set it to that. Then I don't touch this. This is not touched, okay? So this is for shooting without a meter. Then all I do is change the aperture, and I make the aperture change based on my environment. The Sunny 16 rule means at 16, so at an f16 aperture, if I shot in a sunny environment, the picture would be perfect. Like, I guarantee you that. 11 would be for like a partly cloudy day, 8 would be overcast, 5.6 would be a little bit darker than overcast, and 4, 2.8, and 2, and 1.4 are all gonna be indoor. So if I was indoors, I would shoot 1.4, like in this kind of environment, this is relatively dark in here. I would probably shoot at a 1.4 or a 2 and use 400 ISO, use 250 shutter speed, and see if that works. Again, this is just gonna be you getting used to this over time. The other thing to notice is that on lenses, you have these little markings right here. These markings, so the yellow marking indicates what aperture I have selected, right? So that's 2.8. I'm gonna put it at I'm gonna put it at 8, just for this example. Above that, you'll notice some numbers, 4, 8, 11, 16, 22. And what are those numbers? Well, that's matching to your aperture. Those numbers show you the focus range based on your aperture. So if I shoot at 16, okay, I look at these markings, 16 on this side and 16 on this side, and let's say I was focused on subjects that were a foot away. So this one is, or actually that's a meter, sorry, 3.5 feet away, the green is feet. 3.5 feet away, I'm focused on my subject. This little indicator says all the way over here, so at 3 feet, this will be in focus, all the way to over here, so 4.5 feet will be in focus. So your focus is actually a range rather than a specific number. So another example of this might be if I set to 22 and I was focused on something that was 5 feet away, that means stuff at 5 feet would be in focus. And then if I go to 22, stuff at 3.5 feet would be in focus. And if I go to 22, stuff at 10 feet would be in focus. So you can see how you can use this to your advantage to figure out your depth of field. Now some cameras, including this one, have a depth of field tester, which is what this little switch does. Whenever you push that in, it shows you the depth of field. Let's see if I can do this inside my camera. Whenever you do it, see it all went dark. It's showing me my depth of field right now. But some cameras don't have that tester. Anyways, that's what these little markings mean on your lens. Just like with digital film, you really want to follow the rule of, okay, 50 millimeter lens, I don't really want to go above 60 on my shutter speed unless I have a really steady hand, then I could go to 30, okay? That pretty much covers the basics for shooting on this kind of camera. On the digital camera, well, the digital, but yet also actual film camera, this is still a film camera, it actually shoots just like your digital. This is an auto mode, and if I look over here, it's just gonna shoot on auto. But if I put it into something like the manual mode, it shows me my aperture. So on this lens, I don't change the aperture on the lens itself, I only change the focus and the zoom. So here's the zoom, and here's the focus, right, and how many meters away I am. So 5.6, and if I move this dial, I'm changing the shutter speed right now. So as I change that dial, it's changing the shutter speed. To change the aperture, I would hold in this little AV button right here. I hold that in, and then whenever I move that dial, it changes the aperture. You see that number is now changing. So that's if I was shooting on complete manual mode. Whenever I meter, it's telling me, hey, it's way too dark. You're way too dark right now. So let's slow it down till, okay, now I'm in the middle of my exposure range. Okay, you can also just shoot on auto modes or things like that. So on AV, right, it's gonna be your aperture is changing. So I can just open up my aperture, focus, and this picture, let me actually point it out the window so it's a little bit better. There you go, just took a perfect photo. These little dots indicate where the focus is. Now this is the true manual camera. There ain't no meter in this thing. It's just got a dial for your shutter speed. It's got the same markings. These are all gonna be in meters, but it's got the meters, and this is my aperture. So I change my aperture here. This lens goes down to 2.8, and here's my focus, and you can see I can change that. And it gives me that same system of showing me, okay, if I'm at 2.8, then this to this range is gonna be in focus, 5.6, this to this range will be in focus, and so on. It does have like an indicator for like what your ISO is. That's purely just for you to remember. So this is where I would have to truly use that Sunny 16 rule. I don't know if you can quite see in here how this works, but there's a little bright spot, and that's what you use to focus. It's very tricky. Anyways, that's the process for actually shooting on these types of manual cameras. If you have a Holga or a Diana, you don't need to worry about this. There's one setting that you change. Is it sunny outside? Is it not sunny outside? Just for reference, both the Holga and the Diana will not shoot indoors unless you have very bright lights or you have a tripod and you're on bulb mode. So keep that in mind. They are trash toy pinhole cameras after all. All right, so that covers the basics of shooting with manual film.